since the last time we talked, I'm doing good.
In 1 hour ago.
Doing pretty
Then I had to
good.
then hop off to do an hour of supervision to come
Yes.
back here to record another episode. Hi, how are you? It's great to see you.
We love just recording in between things. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
you can really fit it in wherever. But oh, I tried to get a good tie-in, but I couldn't. But today's
I got
episode is
it.
about do it, do it.
Well, I just think this ties into everything in just life, because the only thing constant
Is
in our
change.
lives is change.
Wow. And today's
Wow.
episode is about fear of change.
Fear of change, which, have you ever experienced fear of change, Em?
You know what? Okay, so I'm gonna be totally honest.
Yeah.
I'm someone who like craves disruption. Like as someone who um oh, Jen, all of my shit. Oh, never mind. Okay, somebody I thought that I had an issue, but it seems fine. Like as somebody who like craves, like I like go through things where like I want to blow up my whole life,
Yeah.
right? So like there are times that I feel very pulled towards change and disruption, and there are other parts where I feel like if I have to change for 1 ounce, I will die.
Oh, interesting. Goes from
Yes.
one to the other.
Yes. How about you? I'm a spectrum galley.
Where do you think I land in that spectrum?
No change ever. No, thank you. One time I told you to switch different roads to drive to the Westchester office, and it
I
was like
said,
a 6 month debate.
I was said, what? But you know what? You were right. I had a big fear. You know what I think it is? Like, you become comfortable in what you're doing, like the comfort of it is soothing. And to switch that up, can trigger some anxiety. I think that there's like a biological component to this too, right? Like from an evolutionary perspective, if we know what's in our environment, we are more likely to be able to protect ourselves from a level of threat,
Mm.
right? And so to change that, it's like the fear of the unknown. If I don't know what my environment's like, how am I supposed to protect myself? How am I supposed to hide in that like bush that has kept me protected my whole life? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that there's a biological component to that, and that it induces this anxiety, and anxiety is meant to protect us and care for us at times in which our lives are threatened. But fact of the matter is, change doesn't pose the amount of threats that our anxiety is telling us it's
Mm.
posing.
Okay, so somebody wrote in change equals a loss of control. How do I deal?
Hmm.
So you're saying, okay, so there could be a biological perspective. There's, the very reasonable, obvious ones of like, oh, fuck, this is scary. I don't know what it's going to look like. So how
Mm-hmm.
do we truly deal with this?
Well, it's interesting. My question would be, and maybe, just because this is so nebulous, change equals loss of control. But how much control do you feel like you have currently
Ugh.
without the change? Ooh, like
It's like,
where's
okay,
that
wait.
control coming
There's
from
there's that
currently?
there's the meme that it's like two people on a bus and one is sitting on the one side staring at the mountain and the other is sitting at like on the window side staring at like the vast beauty. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No clue, but keep going. Never saw that before. Keep on
Well, I'll
going.
send it to you afterwards.
Please
But
do.
there's like a part where it's like, okay, like I have no control. Oh, I have no control. Right? Like it's like kind of matters about like how I'm gonna approach this because like we have no motherfucking control.
In general.
Yeah, in general. So what do you want to do with it, right? So I guess we're talking about like how to deal. It's really like how do I adapt?
Right. How do I adapt to this? Especially, I think it's going to be especially hard for those who need control over their environment to feel safe.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you're changing that up, and I guess like change can happen in so many ways, right? Like you could be getting a new job, you could be moving, you could be, I don't know, getting a new puppy. You could be, I don't know. There's so so many things. You could have lost someone in your life. You
Well,
could, go ahead.
well, no, to say this thing, right? Because one of the stuff is that like you also said positives, right? Like, so if I need time to adapt to sometimes negative or difficult change, I also need time to adapt to positive, and wonderful, and exciting change, right? We keep thinking like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I can handle it. Either I've done it before, or I know someone who's done it, or it won't be that bad. But the reality is that the change and transition can be incredibly difficult no matter what the context is around it. And so, do I honor time and space to handle that?
And I think that, we've talked about this before, but I think it's an important thing to reiterate is that we often think the fear of change or the fear of anything must mean that it's wrong, right? Like that we look at almost our anxiety or our fear as this is a signal that I shouldn't be doing this, or this is a signal that something's definitely going to go wrong, as opposed to like, no, that's a natural reaction to change, right? There's something that's natural about that. And just because you're feeling fear, just because you're feeling anxiety, doesn't mean it's the wrong decision or it's something, or that that's going to happen, or that's something, So I think that that's always something to consider too. People say feel the fear and do it anyway,
Mm,
right? That your fear is not a signifier that you shouldn't necessarily be doing something.
yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so somebody said, how do you get over the fear of change? And is it only about having control? I don't think it's just about, you know, having control. I
Right.
think it's also just like fear, right? Like fear of like what's this going to look like next? What if this doesn't work? What if I have to go back? What if I have to admit it's in habit? You know what I mean? Like all these different stuff. So like how you don't get over the fear.
Yeah. And
You don't.
you
You
just don't.
you just do it anyway.
There's such a comfort in what you know, right? Like I can attest to this. I like to feel very comfy in what I know. And so to change that, I mean, and I know we've talked about this before, I specifically take some time to warm up to change. Emmalee is like ready for it. She's ready to go, wants to blow it up. She's in it.
But then I fall apart like a month later.
Right.
Right? Like I'm like, "Oh no, this is great. It's great." And then like because I don't give myself time to process, there's typically a come down afterwards.
Yeah, that is so true. And I process a ton
You
beforehand.
do.
So I am real steady in it. I know that it's going to be challenging, but I've already processed it by the time. So I think that's something to think about is like, what's your process with change? Right?
Mhm.
Is that working for you? Do you feel like our processes are working for us?
I
Mm.
do, unfortunately. Um
I think we balance because we
we
balance
balance
each
each
other
other out.
out so
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
If
Okay, but like here's an example. We got we got Dolly, our new
yes,
cutie
so
puppy. And I
cute.
was just like so excited beforehand, right? And so I kept saying to you, I was like, oh, I think that I'm gonna get depressed and anxious. That's what happened. We got our first dog, which I have not felt any of, but I have felt a urgency of like, can we get over this phase? Like, I don't like love the
Yeah.
puppy phase. I know they're so cute. I get it. She's a roly poly, super fluffy. Like whenever like huge dogs or puppies are so cute, right?
Yes.
But like, I don't like the little
It's hard.
biting and the
It's hard.
teething and the our poor older dog is like, get this girl out of here.
Yeah. It's hard. Puppy face is so hard.
So we're different where you're like, I try to sprint through to avoid, and you're like, I'm gonna sit in this and kind of bask in it, right? So I just think that we're such opposites.
Yes. Like I felt the depression when I first got Louis. Like I really felt it. And
Well,
then
I
I
felt it
like
with
moved.
Murphy,
Yeah.
but not this time. I'm more
Yeah.
like grow up.
Oof. You're like, let's go. Time's a ticking here.
Let's go, baby. Let's get a little
Time
bigger, a little
is
bit.
a
Yeah.
ticket. Yeah, that
Yes.
makes sense. So I think
Mhm.
that's something to ask yourself is like, what is your process with change?
Okay, so what's the most difficult change you've had in your life? Like, if you think about like your life stage transitions, what's been your roughest one?
Maybe like coming out of the womb into like being a human. I think that was really tough for
Yeah,
me.
well, you definitely didn't consent to that one.
Yeah, that wasn't my choice. Just becoming a human in general. I think that was a really hard transition. It was real comfy in that womb. Uh, you know, but let me think. I think moving to New York from out of
Mm,
college was really fucking hard for me. I think that was really, really hard. I just hated New York. I think anytime I had to make big like life stage transitions was really hard.
mm,
But I guess the one thing that I now am able to fall back on or like rely on that I wasn't in the past is when you look at your life and the amount of transitions that you have gone through and the amount of changes that you've gone through, you can look at your process and say, okay, I was really fearful of this. And look how I got through this, right? Like it was temporary. I eventually adjusted, right? I eventually got through this. And the more you do that over and over and over and over again. If you look at your life cycle, you have made changes so many times. If you haven't, you are still just a baby and somehow you have made no changes in your life. You
Just a
haven't
little
changed at all. You
baby.
are still Benjamin Button.
Oh,
Actually, does he age backwards? What happens there?
yeah. Yeah,
What
I
happens
don't
with
know, but
Benjamin?
I don't know. But did I ever remember that time I was teaching a sex ed class and we were talking about like what are myths you've heard about the body? And this little girl was like, "Have you heard about Benjamin Button syndrome?" And I was like, "That's a movie. That's not real." And she was
Yeah.
like, "That's real. That happened to my mom's friend." And I was like, "Is your mom's friend Brad Pitt in the movie Benjamin Button?"
Yeah.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right,
Is her mom friends with Brad Pitt?
maybe.
I mean, I would have. Did you get that little
I
girl's
thought
number? We
we were
need to talk to
I
her.
thought we were gonna talk like, period myths. And she was like, we're gonna talk about
Right.
Benjamin Button syndrome. I don't know if it's
That's
real. Should we
fair.
Google it now? We are we
Maybe,
printing
possibly.
misinformation? Printing.
That's possible. Printing.
Recording?
We're printing. All right, we're getting off topic
Went the
as
other
per
way here. Okay.
usual.
Um, okay, wait. Here's one that I really like though, because this sort of blends into it. Somebody wrote in, unsure if I don't want kids because I'm scared of changing a good thing. I think that's a big one, right? What if shit is working the way it's working well? What do I do with that? What if something changes then and we fuck it all up? That's kind of how I felt, I guess, about getting this puppy too. Murphy is like, but I think we ruined his life.
Yeah. And poor Murphy had no control over the situation.
No, but I mean,
No
I
con
can remember thinking that, like, after I had my daughter, I was like, what did I do? Why did I want this so much? And now I'm like, oh my God, every day is the best day of my life with her. But
Yeah.
especially at the beginning when you're first transitioning and setting into that change, I don't think there's anything wrong with having thoughts like, didn't I just screw this some shit up here?
Yeah. And that's okay. I think that that's also, I think that unless you're in a position where things are so horrible and you need that you're going to have thoughts like that, right? Like I miss parts of my life that were there before, but I'm also embracing and allowing change to come and seeing the like wonderful new things that are happening, right? So
Mm,
I think that unless things are like so terrible and you're doing the change because you're in such a terrible position, right? Or such a that you're going to have thoughts like that. I think that
yeah.
that's only natural.
And I think it's natural for us to romanticize the other side.
Yes.
It's going to be so great, right? Like, I'm switching into this job and it's great. Like, a job is still a job.
Yeah.
I don't care what you do not love 100% of any of that. And if you do, I'd like to hear from you. But it's just not, right? Okay,
Yeah.
but this brings us to another wonderful
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
easy
Good.
listener
Good.
question, which is what if you make a change and it's the grass is always greener and you wish you didn't? Fear of making a mistake if I make a change.
Mm,
So then I feel stuck in it. I'm scared.
I would say if you find yourself making lots of changes and grass is always greener, you got to dig a little deeper there.
And slow it down.
Slow it
What are you,
down.
Emily?
Who you copying off of, Emily?
Sounds like some dumb shit I would do. But I mean, I can think of that, right? Like I remember, especially with the infertility, I was like, all these people with kids are so happy and their life is so good. And I glamorize it and I romanticize it, and then I think it was like a hard come down. And now, I mean, years, but I mean, it takes like, a lot of years to get like situated in that transition. Now, like I said, every day I think is the best. Every day I think she's cooler and cooler and more awesome, and I
She's
love her.
so
Even she's
cool.
so cool, my kid. Um, but this idea of like if I keep looking at what other people have, you know, is it always? I mean, I have felt this way about you too, right? With not having kids, I'm like Jen's life is perfect. Jen is shaking her head. Is your life perfect?
No, it's not perfect. It's absolutely not perfect. No, of course not. and I also look at people with kids and I'm like, oh, that, like, look how
Yeah.
nice that is. To have like a little person, you're like teaching them all these like values and like
Yeah.
helping them grow. Like I look at that and I'm like, there are parts of that that I think would be really nice. And
Hmm.
so I think that it is so easy to glamorize other people's lives because you're
Yeah.
not in it.
You know what I really glamorize? People
But
who live in vans. You know, like van.
me, oh my God, me too.
If I could have like, oh, like if you got to choose, like a magical being came down and
Yes.
you got to choose, like you could live this alternate life for like
Yes.
a
Yep.
week.
I
I
would be
would, I guess a week probably isn't a good one because everything would still be cool after a week.
no, like
But like,
your whole like no, you would have to change your whole life.
yes, to really understand it.
I
But
would live in a van.
I just think, I don't know what sort of filter they're putting on those, but those Instagrams are so cool.
So
I
it's
want
just
van life.
the freedom of van life, right? And you're in this like cool van. I would also take a tiny home if I'm being honest.
Yes. Yes.
Like you're driving a tiny home around, you go anywhere you want. But
Mm-hmm.
there's got to be some sort of, this is how I check myself a little bit. There's got to be some sort of like plumbing situation going on there.
Well, I mean, yeah, you got to shit somewhere. I'm sure there's plenty of situation, but I also think it's once again, it's the romanticization of a life that you don't have.
Right. Exactly.
Right? It looks so amazing and so free, and also they have really good filters on it, and it's on Instagram. Meaning,
That's the thing. Social media really, I think, glamorizes a lot of things for
yeah.
us.
I
And
mean, I mean, Jen, think about how
what?
many couples we see, and
Oh yeah.
like, and then you'd be like, oh, outside this room, you'd be like, this is the world's most perfect couple, and then you're like, aha, they're human too.
Right, right. It really helps being a couples therapist because anytime I'm like, oh, how's everything going? Someone just had a baby or something's happening and like, how's everything going? They're like, oh, it's perfect. And I'm like, okay.
Do you
Okay.
accept that as the answer, or do you push them?
It depends how much I want to do some digging. I mean, I
Okay.
have to respect people's boundaries. And I assume if they're saying it's perfect, then they're setting a boundary,
Mm,
right? That they're pretty much saying, don't fucking dig into that.
yeah, yeah. I also think sometimes we just say what we think we're supposed to say
Yeah.
because,
Little,
like, right, like what you're not supposed to say after you have a kid is like 0 out of 10 don't recommend, and like I know I said that.
you definitely did.
Like I don't know, those first
So
6 months, I was like,
would
I
you,
made a mistake.
right? Would you say that now?
That I feel that way now.
Yeah.
And I think every day with Millie is the coolest day of my life.
So that's
But
okay.
at the
That
beginning,
is
I did feel that way. I was like, oh my gosh.
right. Right. So that's a huge thing, right? That I think because a lot of people are saying I have this fear of making a mistake. There might be a period of time in which you feel like this is a
Mm,
mistake, right? That does not mean that will stick with you forever because these things also change and adjust, right? Like your
yes.
child is constantly growing. And when they're growing, you're constantly adjusting in your relationship with them. I would assume. I don't want to speak
Yeah.
for your relationship, but there's so much changes always happening.
Yeah. And it's hideous, right? Like, can you hold on to come out the other side? If the
Yes.
transition is so difficult, how do you say to yourself, I guess we are going through, and I think about this a lot of times also in relationships in our lives. Can we hold on through how hard this is right now and get out the other side?
Mm, that's good.
It's tough though.
That's so
Because
tough.
somebody wrote in, how to not constantly plan for the worst case scenario. Well, one, I'd say you're very good at self protecting.
Very good.
If you are someone who's always planning for the worst case scenario, doing catastrophizing, you're probably pretty solid at self protection. And I'm wondering why you need that self protection. What is the function behind always having that plan? What does that do for you? And does it work? And if it doesn't work, then what do we need to adjust?
Yeah. And you know what? And I think that there's a lot of fear around this, but I would take yourself into the worst case scenario, right? Because us planning for worst case scenario is basically saying, oh, this is going to happen. And I have to make sure that this doesn't happen, right? That a lot of people, when they say plan
Hmm.
for worst case scenario, it's I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure worst case scenario does not happen.
Hmm.
Right. So the thing I want you to do is I want you to take yourself into worst case scenario, right? What is worst case scenario? How would you handle it at the time if you were to get there? Right. Because sometimes when we plan for worst case scenario, we're planning for something that never happens, right? We're putting time, energy, and effort into something that never ends up happening.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is that if worst case scenario were to happen, I wouldn't be able to handle that in the moment.
Mm,
What you're telling us through this question is that you are a high functioner, right? You're planning for every possible scenario. My guess is that if worst case scenario were to happen, you would have the tools to be able to take care of yourself and move through that in the ways you need to move through it if it were to happen.
mm. Okay, so then here's another good one. My husband is scared of kids, which changes life. It will. Our relationship and fears he'll be a bad dad. He has anxiety, and his fear of moving forward through life milestones makes me feel stuck. Here is the hard part. When someone else in our life is doing this, it is not our job to convince them. It is our job to support them and say, it sounds like we really need to find some place for you to figure this out and talk it through. Do you want some help finding a therapist? What would it be like to explore these things? What parts do you want to talk through with me? Not just us saying, you're being ridiculous.
Right.
You're so anxious, it'll be fine. Because some of those fears are valid.
Yes.
And so, what happens if some of those fears come true? It will change his life in some ways, and it will change your relationship.
Yeah.
Does that mean he's to be a bad dad? No. It takes a lot to be a shitty parent, actually, because kids actually just really love you, kind of no matter what you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, what would that look like? What would define a bad dad? How would you sort through those? And let's say you need some work in your parenting area. Man, it's pretty easy to access free information of how to improve parenting. Let me tell you, books, Google,
And Google.
Googling.
Google it.
Yeah.
Um, I would also want to know um what your husband's fear is bringing up for you, right? How is this um affecting your
Mm,
emotions within the relationship? Um, and because I think sometimes it's easy to personalize that or to say, oh, my husband is he needs to get to the point where he has no fear or he feels like he's going to be a good dad in order for us to move forward. I think that there's a lot of emotional intelligence and reflection that's clearly happening on your husband's part for him to even just say this, for
mm,
him to be expressive about this. I think so often people hold this in or they like deny themselves the experience of saying like I'm fearful of this. Like this is scary to me. I don't know how I would feel being a father.
mm-hmm.
And just the fact that he's asking himself those questions, I think is really important because with those questions, it can lead you to doing some more reflection and understanding of like, where are these coming from for me? And I think it's a never ending process, I would think within anything that you do or any changes that you make is being able to be self-reflective and saying like, how am I doing in this? Where are my fears? What's coming up for me? And so the fact that he's already being self-reflective, I think is, a pretty wonderful thing for for a father to be, for someone who's contemplating becoming a father to even be thinking about that in
Mm-hmm.
advance.
Mm. Are
You
you ready for the
know,
next one? Yeah, no, no.
I am.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like that. I mean, it takes so much to be a bad parent. If you're worried about being a good parent, it means you're going to probably be a pretty good parent.
Because the fact that you're worrying about it in
Yes,
general,
tells us how much you care.
right? Like you are
Yeah.
already thinking about your child that hasn't been born yet or
Mm.
conceived yet.
Yep. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
I want to move far away with my husband and kids, but I'm so scared to leave my family, home and friends.
Mm.
Mm.
She wants
So
to live that van life.
well, when I first read it,
Get in the
when I
van.
first read the question, it was like, I want to move far away from my husband and kids, and I was like, oh, I don't think we
Yeah.
should give that recommendation.
Right, right.
But you want to
Yes.
take them with you, and that's great.
In the
Okay,
van. Get in the
so
van.
yes, so what I think is that it would be scary as hell, right? So what would the stuff you be, right? So how do you say to yourself, here are the things that's gonna hurt? I'm gonna miss out on stuff. Am I going to feel distant from them? Am I going to feel rejected from them? Right? Like, what are the things that I like? If you break it down, what are the things I'm so worried about? And do you still want to do this thing? Could you sit in the discomfort of all those other things to have this excitement and new chapter in your life? And also, if it doesn't feel like a good fit, what happens? I don't know how old the kids are, right? If your kids are really young, then you could move them back and forth. If your kids are in high school, it's probably pretty difficult to move and then move back again, right? So that I think does depend on like children's ages. But let's say you went and then it was too much and you move back again. Like, would that be the worst thing in the world? Like, I think also all of us are like worried, especially if we have really opinionated family and friends that are like, oh my God, you're gonna move and you're gonna like, it's not gonna work out well. This is a huge mistake. Then it like almost feels like I can't let this fail because I have to prove everyone wrong, right?
Spite.
So like, what would it be
Spite.
like to like sort of humble yourself and
Yeah.
be like, all right, like, yeah, maybe, and say to those people, you're right, could be a total shit show, man. I'm doing it. Totally, for sure, could be a mess, and still I'm going. Yes, and
And if it's a shit show, and I really want to move, there are ways to make adjustments, right? Once again, I know with kids being certain ages, it makes it hard. But I think another question to ask yourself is, okay, if you're going to make this change, your relationships or the way that you relate in your relationships might have to change too, right?
mm,
Does that mean how much are you going to be calling people FaceTime? How much will you be visiting home, right? That there are so many adjustments that are going to also probably take place within that move that you can also account for, right? It just means your relationships might change in ways, but you're able to maintain those relationships in maybe ways that you weren't maintaining them before. And so maybe that
mm-hmm.
means you're having deeper conversations on the phone. Maybe you're talking longer. Maybe you're talking to them more, than you were talking to them when you were closer. And so it'll just be different ways of relating to family and friends if you're
Yeah.
moving away. So it's just another adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Um, Changing jobs. I love my job. I just know location is not ideal for my family, but scared of change. That's a really hard one when
Yeah.
you love your job, right? It's easy to be like, I fucking hate my job, so I'm out of here. But like when you love something and it's still not the best fit because of all these other factors, there's also like a grieving process there.
Yes. Yeah, I think that that's kind of the question is your and I think making the choice to grieve something is really hard too. Like when grief is out of your control, of course, that's like really, really challenging, painful. You're kind of pushed into it, into the grief, as opposed to like, I need to make a decision to grieve
Mm,
this. It's like making a decision to end a relationship or making a decision um, I need to push myself into grief, right? That there's, you know, I think too, there can be so much celebration around finding a different job and a job that like works for your family and like where they're located. Um, and so, we talked about this before, this level of like disenfranchised grief that sometimes there isn't support around I'm leaving this job that doesn't work for my family, but I really love. And
mm,
so, can I still give myself the space to feel this grief and know that it's okay, even with this change that might be helpful for my family and my family's lives?
yeah.
So I think just allowing yourself to acknowledge and feel that too. Um, but it's not easy. It is not easy. And I commend you for making that change.
Okay, where did you pick one more question? Then we have to do Dear Em and Jen.
Okay.
You want to pick one?
Let
Dealer's
me look.
choice.
Dealer's choice again. You turned it to where are you from? Where are you from this
Dealer's
time?
choice. I don't know. New Jersey. Dealer's choice.
um, can you speak to change involved with setting boundaries and why
Mm.
it's so scary to set them because of fear of change?
I think we're also talking about fear of losing the role that we have. If I set a boundary with person, what does that mean for our relationship? Right? Like I think oftentimes our fear of change is also what could come up in some ways, like that adaptive child part of what's been triggered. If I set a boundary with you, am I then kicked out of your life? am I then hurting you? And is there then suffering, right? Like, there's so many different risks of changing any type of situation.
Mhm. And I think, we talked a lot about control and um, change, right? That in your relationships, you at least you know what your role is, right? Like, you understand what your dynamic is in the relationship, but it might not be working for you. So if you set that boundary, you have control over your boundary, but you don't have control of how the other person's going to react or respond to your boundary. I think that can be really scary at times, right? Like, that can be hard to process. And because right now, if you don't have that boundary, you might know how they're going to respond, they're going to react, what your dynamic is. So it's almost like what's the saying? I think I'm terrible at saying. So the devil you know.
The devil you know, and the devil you don't.
Right. The devil you know, right. But clearly you wouldn't be writing this in if you didn't feel the need to set a boundary in your relationship. And so I think that um, the question is, can you tolerate the discomfort of change in that boundary in order to better take care of yourself?
Yeah.
Right. And knowing that the discomfort is temporary. I think that's a big thing, is that to know that the discomfort in change is just temporary. We don't know how long it's going to last, but eventually you adjust to it. You are an adaptive creature, and you get to the point where you have adjusted to that change. It just takes some time.
Yeah. Are you ready for Dear Em and Jen?
I'm ready.
Dear Em and Jen, I'm on the fence about going and getting my PhD or having babies. I'm considering going to get a PhD in psychology and want to be a therapist for children. Any recommendations on how to sort through those feelings?
I was just
Why can't you do both? So I think this is when it becomes a nuanced conversation of, for some people, doing both is an option. Let's say if you have family close or you have means for childcare, you have a really supportive partner with a flexible schedule, you're right, not the automatic default parent. There is a lot of context and nuance to this conversation about how you handle this.
Yes.
I do think that it's a tricky situation, right? So if they're saying any recommendations how to sort through those feelings, the feelings I would sort through would be like, okay, if you were to envision your life with one and not the other, what would that look like? If I had to choose one and not just like, because I'm wondering if what they're saying is like putting having children on the back burner for right now. Right. So what does that look like? Do I care about that? Is that difficult for me? Does this feel, is it a PhD program where I'm going, 3 years straight through, or this is in a longer, slower process, right? Like, so I think one, like a lot more context of like, what would this truly be like for me? And how would I go deep about there maybe isn't a right decision. That's the hard part with something like this, is like we all want it to be like, oh, well, secretly there's some vault somewhere. And in that little vault, it says exactly that Kelly May is supposed to only have the babies. Right? And like, that's not it. There is no right. There is no specific thing. It's that, how do I make a choice? And choice isn't always very clear.
Yeah. I also think no matter what you decide, right, if it has to be one or the other, that it will not come without wondering about the other. Like I think it's natural for us to think about road less traveled, right? Like, what if I
Lived in a van.
lived in a van?
Had the babies or got the PhD.
Right. I think that is very human to just think about, what would have happened if I did something differently? What would my life look like now?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we want to make a decision knowing it's the right decision, and knowing it's the right decision means that we're not going to think about the other decision. But I just want to normalize the fact that no matter what decision we make, it's natural to think about the road less traveled, even, especially if it's like in huge conflict for us.
Yeah.
Right. So
I would also talk to child psychologists and see if you actually need that PhD.
Yes. Just from a logistics standpoint.
You could probably just get a certification.
And you could just be a therapist.
Yeah, or is your ego telling you you have to be a doctor?
Right.
Right? I don't know. I don't know if that is. We need more information here.
Right.
But
Explore all the options.
But it doesn't matter because either way, we ran out of time.
We ran out of time. Wait, before we end. Oh, we have no time.
No, I don't know. What is it?
I was just going to say your birthday's coming up.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. Happy birthday, first of all. By the time this episode airs, your birthday would have happened already. But you did this to me, so I'm doing it to you. What was your highs and lows of this year?
Oh, the highs is everything with my relationship with Millie is so good. And I'm also going to put my marriage in highs and lows, that we have had a really tough year in our marriage and we have worked our fucking asses off in our marriage to get to such a good place. I mean, we have spent so much money in couples therapy and so much time and energy and tears and blood and everything else. And so I will say for me, my highs and my lows are the same, which is that shit was hard and shit was wonderful.
That was beautiful.
That's what I got. And for everyone else listening, we hope you enjoyed today's episode of Shrink Chicks. Please send it to a friend who might enjoy it as well. You can always rate, review, subscribe, follow an Apple Podcast. You could follow us on Instagram at ShrinkChicks or the therapy group. We ask that you, if you're needing any help finding a therapist, we invite you to check out some of our amazing clinicians at thetherapygroup.com. If you are located in Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Florida, California, in person in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Westchester, Pennsylvania, reach on out. We will help you get situated with a great clinician and try to help you find someone somewhere. Thank you for listening. And Jen, if I want to know myself, or if I want to grow myself, what do I do?
You got to know yourself.
Right. Know yourself, grow yourself. We'll see you next